Hey, hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our conversation about the future of Roe v. Wade and how we can defend abortion rights, which unfortunately has proven to be a very necessary and very timely conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute to introduce everyone to our host for today, Amy Littlefield. Amy is the nation's new abortion access correspondent. She was previously a reporter for Rewire News and a news producer for Democracy Now! Amy has reported for various newspapers, including Los Angeles Times and the Enterprise in Brockton, Massachusetts, where she won awards for her investigative reporting on nepotism in city government. She's also a recipient of a 2014 I.F. Stone Award from the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute and a 2018 Adelante Fellowship from the International Women's Media Foundation. We're really thrilled to have her and really thrilled for this conversation. I can't wait to learn a lot from both of our panelists today. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Amy to get us started.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This event is such an honor for me because I get to, be part of a magazine that arrives at my parents' house on a regular basis, which I'm very proud of, and arrives at my own house, of course. And I also get to introduce someone who really shaped my thinking when it comes to reproductive rights, and that is the Nation columnist, Katha Pollitt. I told Katha this when we were preparing for this discussion, but she came to speak on my college campus when I was an undergraduate about 15 years ago, and I was very starstruck and afraid to approach her at that point. So it is a real honor to be here in conversation with you, Katha. And, at a moment when I don't think either of us during that event, 15 years ago could have imagined what we're facing today. Before I introduce Katha, I want to sort of take a moment to set the stakes in terms of what we're facing in this moment. We're in the midst of a human rights crisis in Texas, where, according to the Guttmacher Institute, almost 1 in 10 women of reproductive age, that's 7 million people who live in Texas out of 75 million across the country, live in a state where abortion is now just about illegal. A law that took effect on September 1st bans abortion after embryonic cardiac activity can be detected. That happens between 5 and 7 weeks of pregnancy, which is 1 to 3 weeks after a missed period before many people realize that they're pregnant. The law deputizes any private citizen to become a bounty hunter who enforces the law by suing for $10,000 per abortion. And it implicates anyone who aids or abets someone getting an abortion and holds them liable. And we just don't know exactly what that could mean. It applies to a patient's husband or a friend or a cab driver or anyone who may be part of a patient's abortion experience. So what's happening now, and I've reported on this for the Nation, is this sort of mass migration of patients from Texas to clinics across not just Oklahoma and Louisiana, where they're booked up for many weeks now, and it's very difficult to get an appointment, but even as far afield as Seattle in California. There's been a tremendous rise in interest and requests for self-managed abortion using pills from overseas organizations like Aid Access that ship to the United States. And we're facing the possibility that this is going to become our new normal, because the Supreme Court has just announced that December 1st is going to be the day when it will hear a case concerning Mississippi's attempt to ban abortion 15 weeks, a case that really strikes right at the heart of Roe v. Wade. So, grassroots activists have been preparing for this moment for some time. And I know, Katha, you and I have both been watching it for some time. So I want to introduce our speaker, Katha Pollitt, the award-winning subject to debate columnist for the Nation, renowned author of many works of nonfiction and poetry. Many of her contributions to the Nation are compiled in 3 books: Reasonable Creatures, Essays on Women and Feminism, Subject to Debate, Sense and Dissents on Women, Politics and Culture, and Virginity or Death and Other Social and Political Issues of Our Time. And her most recent book is Reclaiming Abortion Rights, which the New York Times listed as a notable book of 2014. We were supposed to have a second guest today, Dr. Ghazala Moayedi, who is an abortion provider in Texas and Oklahoma, but unfortunately she is preparing, well, fortunately she's preparing to testify before Congress, but unfortunately that meant that she was not able to join us and had to cancel at the last minute. So I want to kick us off by reading an excerpt of the op-ed that she wrote in the New York Times recently, where she said, quote, "All pregnancies have now become more dangerous in Texas. There are a few reasons for that. For one, we know that death from childbirth is considerably higher than with induced abortion, and childbirth is especially dangerous in a state like Texas with our abysmal maternal mortality rates. That doesn't mean we should fear pregnancy, but since pregnancy can be dangerous, you should have to consent to continue a pregnancy, right? And people need to do it with a full heart and understanding." So Katha, I want to ask you to sort of tell us what we're facing in Texas and what people can do about it. You recently wrote a column called Boycott Texas, and you say that although you're not generally a fan of boycotts because they risk hurting ordinary people who are trying to make a living, this is an exceptional case where you think Texas has gone too far. Talk about why you think a boycott is something we need now in Texas.
Well, I'm not 100% wedded to a boycott, but I am struck that in previous examples of horrible laws being passed in the states, there have been boycotts, and some of them have been successful. For example, in North Carolina, when there was the famous bathroom bill that also took away protections from LGBT people, other protections from LGBT people, there was a sports boycott. There was a whole lot of activity, and sure enough, the legislature backed off. In Indiana, when they passed their Religious Freedom Protection Act, that was another anti-gay and anti-trans bill, there was a huge dust up, and within a week, the state legislature had effectively nullified it. And there have been some other examples where that has also been true. So it just struck me how people were very quick to leap forward when these awful bills came up. And they haven't been so quick to leap forward in this case. And by people, I mean big companies, celebrities, sports boycott. A sports boycott could be huge. And it just interests me that this isn't sort of a go-to tactic in this case. So I was thinking, well, maybe it should be. And I think that I would certainly boycott anything. I would boycott anything at this point. And, if, say, academic conventions refuse to locate their events in Texas, if sports activities refuse to go there, if people boycotted some of the major companies, and I have a little handy list, and one of them, the only one that seemed relevant to most people, was 7-Eleven. So, but also Southwest Air, American Air, AT&T, ExxonMobil, Dell, and Hewlett Packard. If you were to write to Dell or Hewlett Packard and say, well, next time I buy a computer, it's not going to be from you. I think that if enough people do that, that might get their juices flowing a little bit, because the silence is just so deafening. I do want to mention, though, that David Simon, who was the person behind The Wire, has moved, is not going to shoot, he says, his big upcoming HBO project in Texas. He's moving because he says, how can I guarantee the rights and liberties of the women who would be working on this? So forget it. I think that kind of thing can be very effective.
That's interesting. And I remember, in the Indiana case that you mentioned, the North Carolina case, there being debate then about, is it right to turn to corporations to sort of, even though that's an economic leverage point, do we really rely on them for moral authority in this moment? And I do think there has been some an outpouring of a different kind, which is people donating to abortion funds that are doing the hard work of getting people out of state, getting them onto airplanes and buses, and trying to get as many people to abortion care as possible. I mean, we saw this with the attempts in the South to pass near total abortion bans in 2019, millions of dollars raised. And I don't think we know the total that's been raised for Texas abortion funds. But Katha, I know you've been part of getting the word out for that. And, you know, we have to think big about this too, right? Because this is only the beginning. On December 1st, the Supreme Court is going to hear the Mississippi case that we've been watching for a long time that really seems to strike right at the core of Roe v. Wade and give the court an opportunity to, if not overturn it outright, you know, gut it beyond recognition. And Katha, you wrote about this, that you think it's actually going to be worse in a way if Roe falls than it was before Roe v. Wade, because even though we have abortion-inducing medication that can be taken safely, and the coat hanger, you know, that was the symbol in the 60s and 70s is no longer sort of the, has the sort of like prevalence and significance that it once did. Talk about what you think we're facing. I mean, Texas is sort of giving us a preview in a sense, but this could be nationwide.
Well, as I wrote in that column, in one way, the fall of Roe will be less bad than the pre-Roe era because of abortion pills. But I was a little too optimistic about that, because after that column came out, and where I said, you know, the people will take these pills and they won't do these dangerous things. Some people are still doing the dangerous things. I mean, that's the thing. Once something is illegal, not everybody knows that it's there for them. You have to kind of know what to do, and you have to have a computer, or you have to trust the person that's selling you these pills, et cetera, et cetera. So there will be some horrible medical things that non-medical things that happen. But I don't think it will be like it was before. But in another way, it will be worse than before, because when abortion was illegal, it was a very, very common experience. And it wasn't, although of course the Catholic Church was always against it, and the murder rhetoric was always out there, that you're killing a child. It was always out there. It wasn't like now, because people didn't talk about it so much. But now there is a whole movement, a very large, and I'm sorry to say grassroots movement, that is organized around abortion is the worst thing a woman can do. It's really evil. And it's spread to, I mean, but when abortion was illegal, women were not arrested for taking illegal drugs and having a stillbirth, and, you know, which may or might not have been connected to that. There was much more of a culture of just leave women alone. Let's just not talk about this. And now it is central. It has become central to politics. And that means that women are more stigmatized for having an abortion, I think, than before. It's more likely that, you know, as in this terrible Texas law, somebody is going to interest themselves in whether you have an abortion or not, which was certainly not the case before. So I think this organized political movement, which is based in the Catholic Church and the evangelical fundamentalist churches, is very, very powerful, and it's powerful at the local level. That was not true before, and so I think that it's become too what's the opposite of celebrated? To denigrated a thing to be private.
Right. And we have seen cases of people being criminalized for their pregnancy outcomes and who have gone to jail, you know, cases like Fetal in Indiana. And of course, it's women of color and LGBTQ people who are already criminalized disproportionately who are going to bear the brunt of that. I want to echo the invitation to submit questions in the chat, because we're going to be moving into the Q&A in about 15 minutes. I'm going to ask a few more questions, and then we would love to hear what the audience wants to ask Katha. But I want to reflect a little bit on how we arrived at this moment and how we got here. Katha, you write about that in your book, Pro, and you're quite critical at times of the pro-choice movement for its legal strategy in sort of trying to defend Roe v. Wade. And you also point out examples of, when abortion was viewed very differently by the Republican Party. I mean, that Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, signed a liberal abortion law, that Title X, which is our public subsidy for family planning in this country still to this day, was signed into law by Richard Nixon. And then we saw this sort of pivot to the Southern strategy and the intertwining of racism and anti-abortion sentiment as a way to win over voters by the Republican Party. So tell us your assessment. How do we get here? It took them 50 years, but we really are on the verge of seeing Roe fall.
Yes, well, as I said, the anti-choice movement really is a grassroots movement. It's terrible to think this. And they use all the grassroots technique. They read Saul Alinsky. Nobody else does, but they're there reading Saul Alinsky. And they take many a leaf from the left, from the protest movements of the left. And they have, I don't want to say infiltrated, but they are active at every level of society, from the zoning committee of some town where somebody says, oh, I would like to build an abortion clinic. They're already on the zoning committee saying, well, you can't do that. School boards everywhere. And that's not really a tactic that progressives have used much. They're much more focused on the federal government and the higher state positions, but not on these little jobs. So that way, that's been very beneficial to them. And also they have the advantage of being based in organizations, churches, where you're there every week and you just meet. It's just very natural that you go to church, you meet some people, you're all anti-choice together. Maybe you have a table after the social where you write letters to your congressman, all that kind of thing. We don't have anything like that. It's very sad. I wrote in Pro that if you move to the town where I'm now living, Clinton, Connecticut, a small, more or less sort of liberal town on the Connecticut shore, if you were anti-choice, you could be hooked up with your fellow anti-choicers overnight. Just go to the Catholic Church. They're all there. At the Catholic Church, there is a little statue to the unborn. They're very out in the open. If you were pro-choice, it would take you a lot longer. I mean, maybe you'd want to be active in the Democratic Party, but it's not the same at all. And so I think that that's very unfortunate about our movement, that we haven't really got a way to be active every day, whereas the other side does have that. So what was the rest of your question?
Yeah, and I think that by the end, I would love to leave people with some ideas for how they can be active every day, because I think there is a lot of grassroots activism going on for reproductive justice, and a lot of it is driven by abortion funds that are trying to do the hard, not glamorous at all work of getting people the care they need, right? And raising money in order to, pay for care, because we're in a reality where in most states it's not covered by public insurance due to the Hyde Amendment. So I don't want to erase the grassroots organizing that is going on there.
No. There's wonderful stuff going on, but it's not at that kind of granular everyday level for ordinary people. You have to be kind of really into it to get involved with an abortion fund or to be a clinic escort. That's a kind of high buy-in, whereas the other side has a very low buy-in. It's sort of like with Occupy. I thought, well, there's only a limited number of people who are going to want to sleep outside in a park. Um, and, especially if you're not, if you're—
It was a lot of people, as it turned out.
There was a lot of people, but there were a lot of people who, I think, whereas the other side, the Tea Party, you sit there at your kitchen table. It was just a whole different thing. And of course, the Tea Party had all that extra money
Right.
from
Turned out to be less grassroots than we thought.
Yeah. But still, there was a grassroots component. So I think that one thing I do want to say that's a difference between the two movements is that our movement actually spends a lot of energy providing real healthcare.
Right.
That's what Planned Parenthood's thing really is running its centers and all like that. And it's a struggle to have them be as political as they now are. The other side doesn't bother with any of that. They're not providing healthcare; they're preventing healthcare. So
much easier to do.
It's much easier to do.
Yeah.
It's much easier to not provide something than to provide it. So I think this is I don't want to say it's a good moment. It's a terrible moment in every way, but it is a moment when we can really think about how we can be most effective, how we can draw in people. Most people are pretty passive about politics, and they're pretty passive about this. I mean, maybe they'll write a check to Planned Parenthood once a year. How to get them more involved. The people that are already on our side, but they don't do a whole lot. I think this is a good moment to think about that.
Yeah, and that leads me into my next question. I see we're already getting some questions in the chat about this. Where do we go from here? How do we, expand the movement? How do we fight back in this moment? And to sort of get us started thinking about that, I want to think about the fact that 2021 has been the worst year on record for two different kinds of state legislation. Anti-abortion laws, we've seen more in 2021 than ever before, and also anti-trans legislation, anti-LGBTQ legislation, bills that are aimed at taking healthcare away from trans children. And we're seeing now, even more than ever, how interconnected those issues are, how, the Christian rights agenda is really about erasing trans people and subjugating women, and how interconnected those goals are. It's not a coincidence, right, that we're seeing the same state lawmakers introducing these bills. And so I'm curious, Katha, because you wrote a column back in 2015 about who has abortions, and you were critical at that time of the sort of shift in the movement that's going on towards gender inclusive terminology, and acknowledging that it's not only women who have abortions, it's also transgender men, it's also non-binary people who are facing many, many barriers to healthcare before they even get to the clinic door. I'm curious if your thinking has shifted on this topic, because it seems like the movement has come a long way. It's a lot more normalized now to use terms like pregnant people, and to, acknowledge that it's not only women who have abortions. Where do you stand on this now?
Well, I think that you can acknowledge those other people, but not stop using the word woman. Frankly, I'm disturbed by that, because I feel that if you stop using the word woman, you lose a lot of politics. You lose a lot. I mean, we still call it feminism, for heaven's sakes. The word woman is right in there. So I would be happy with, women and other people, women and others, women and other people, women, trans, non-binary. But to take away the word woman, I think, is not only something I don't agree with, I think it's something most people don't agree with. I think that, words like pregnant person, menstruator, uterus haver, these are very insulting to people. Birthing person. I know you said on Twitter you like that.
Yeah, I disagree. I like that term. And I like it. I'll tell you why I like it. It's because it's accurate, and I think, we have a couple things on our side that are really important against the anti-abortion side. And one of them is accuracy. We've got the science and the evidence on our side. We know that a zygote is not a human being with, constitutional rights, right? Scientifically, I think that's clear. And scientifically, it's the case. People besides, cis women have abortions, and they are also among, the most marginalized people in our society. And I think there's a moral call to stand with them as well. But I think it's inaccurate to only talk about women, and, to ignore the fact that there are a lot of people out there who aren't in that category, who are impacted by these laws.
Well, maybe we can have another session where we discuss that. As I say, I think my way is the more inclusive way. And also, most people who have abortions are so-called cis women. And I think that the way you let people know that, say, a fund is there for them is by using words that the large majority of people that are going to try to be finding you will find you. So that is, that was said to me by a person who runs an abortion clinic that has the word woman in the title. And she said, that's because that's how people find you. So I think there's that too. But we have so many bigger problems than what we call ourselves. And I think that this is a discussion that is going to take a while to sort itself out.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think it has changed so much, and that's why I wanted to raise it, because I think the use of gender inclusive terminology is quite normalized now. I mean, a successful example that I think of is the EACH Act, which I think is one of the most bold and progressive pieces of legislation. And for folks who aren't aware, the Hyde Amendment is a longstanding ban on federal funding of abortion. The EACH Act is legislation in Congress that would repeal that so that people can get funding for abortion under Medicaid. So it's a bold and important piece of legislation. And they removed the word woman from it. It's now just called the EACH Act. And I don't think that's, detracted politically from its power.
Well, I guess the one thing I'd like to say about this is, I think when you take the word woman out, you lose why abortion is illegal. Abortion is not illegal because men have them. Abortion is illegal because women have them. Specifically women. It is about men controlling women, and conservative institutions like churches controlling women through their bodies. I think you lose all of that if you take out the word woman.
So I'm seeing we have a lot of engagement on this issue in the chat and lots of great questions coming in. So I want to encourage people to submit your questions and, engage with any of the topics that we've talked about. Where do we go from here? Where are we right now? I'd love to know if there are folks who are in Texas or other impacted states who can talk about what the situation on the ground is. And since we're at about the halfway mark, let's go ahead and start moving into questions. So here's our first question from Diane Feely. It seems to me that mass action and civil disobedience are key to fighting this law. There are more than 500 actions planned for October 2nd. Where should the movement go from here? Katha, can you talk about that, the Women's March and the planning for October 2nd?
I was just on their website, and there are marches being planned all over the country. So that's great, and people should go to one. And I'm trying to decide, do I go to Middletown? Do I go to New Haven? I mean, part of me thinks, if it isn't in Washington or New York or LA, that's not going to make much of an impression on the news, but it makes an impression. It makes a little impression on the news, and it also makes an impression. It's a powerful statement. To have these marches all over the country. I think it's really great. And I'm very grateful to the Women's March for, leading the way on this. I think we have to it's sort of like we have to do everything. We have, I was just reading the Revolutionary Communist Parties, they email me constantly. And And they said, oh my God, now they're talking about how you have to elect better representatives. That's never going to work. That'll take years and years. Out into the streets. But it's hard to see how out into the streets by itself is going to affect these Texas lawmakers who they don't care what happens in Connecticut. They probably think, well, this shows we're right. This proves. So I think we have to do everything. We have to be electoral. We have to be in the streets. We have to donate lots of money. We have to get involved in a more, not just in a money giving way, but more activist kind of a way. We have to, this is something you mentioned was like that Katie Wilson said in her book, The Scarlet A, that we have to talk to people. We have to actually talk to people about abortion. And that's not easy because people don't like to talk about sex and women and what goes on in women's bodies. It's also horrible. And I think we have to have those hard conversations with people who maybe don't agree with us 100%.
Yeah, she talks about abortion beneficiaries and that, anyone who's ever had sex without the fear of pregnancy is included in that category. And that, or any, a man whose girlfriend had an abortion when she was 16, and who got to grow up and have the life that he wants to have, that, those folks need to be talking, if not in public, then in private with their families in order to build that movement. And I think you raised a really important point there too, Katha, about local organizing. And when people ask, what can I do beyond donating to abortion funds in Texas, which I think is really important, it is paying attention to what your state lawmakers are doing, because Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, where I live, these are states that are passing and considering legislation to make abortion access even easier, which is really going to matter if we start to have more patients from the South and Midwest traveling here. So paying attention to what your own state lawmakers are doing is really important. I'll move on to another question here. From Gail James, I contend that the reproductive rights community has allowed for this grassroots anti-abortion movement because they never confronted the racism underlying this faux morality position. I contend that they want more white babies. Also, they never took on the moral issue directly. What can be done now to address and confront this racism and anti-human rights in our society?
Well, I think what, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call the pro-choice movement, I think they have recently become quite aware of the kinds of things that the questioner is raising. And you're seeing a lot of organizational leadership turnover where white people step aside and a person of color takes over. And there's the whole reproductive justice framework, which is different than the choice framework, which kind of just stops, you have the right to decide. Okay, fine, great. But reproductive justice goes much deeper into, you have the right to have a baby and not have a baby. But if you have a baby, you have the right to raise it in decency. And it sounds so radical in this country, but this is actually something that exists in many European countries, where if it's Germany and you have, I know this because I'm a single mother that I know, all the ways that her life is incredibly difficult would not be difficult in Germany. That she would have money. She would have a hard time. Women are very disadvantaged in the workplace. It's a very patriarchal society still that is organized around the woman at home and the man at work. But if she's taking care of a little baby and she's a single mother, she will not be out on the streets. And this is normal. This is normal in many advanced countries. Our country is so unusual in the severity of the situations we visit on women who have in our culture, sometimes misfortune to have a baby that is not perfectly well timed so that they can just, keep all those balls in the air. And so I think that the reproductive justice framework has a lot of potential. And I think here's a way that COVID I don't want to say it helps since it's such a major disaster, but COVID sort of helps to move the conversation forward, because I think a lot of people now are realizing there is no support system for women who with kids. Your husband is maybe the best you have, but he's probably going to make you do all the work. You know, there are women who have to quit their jobs to stay home with you know, all those rickety arrangements with childcare and daycare and babysitters and nannies and after school. It's all over. And so people can really see that women are the support system in this culture.
Mm-hmm. And Katha, for folks who are unfamiliar with the term reproductive justice that you used, I just want to note it's a movement coined by Black women, the terminology in 1994, that was sort of a recognition of what had been left out of the pro-choice movement. As you mentioned, the reproductive justice is really about the right to have children when one wants them on one's own terms. And it is also about issues like, you know, police brutality, gender affirming healthcare, you know, universal access to healthcare and Medicaid, you know, issues that are much broader. And that framework has really become much more central, I think, to the way that we think about issues of abortion today, and has really drawn attention to the fact that abortion is not accessible to many people, especially folks of color, even if it might be legal on paper. We have another question here from Ariel Boone. If the Supreme Court does dismantle Roe, what would history say that abortion rights advocates should do to fight back? How will the movement need to change? What would you like to see happen?
Oh, history. Maybe we should ask history. Well, I think there's going to have to be, in addition to all the things we've mentioned, like, you know, very proactive organizing and political activism and all the rest, there's going to have to be a kind of network, large network of people who will help women who have the misfortune to live in states that go hard anti-abortion after Roe falls. I mean, it won't be every state. Some states are better. California has reproductive rights in its constitution. New York State has passed protections. I have a whole list of states that are good. Colorado, Delaware, Illinois, a big state, Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and the District of Columbia. So, you know, it's not like it's going to be hopeless everywhere, but the people, there will be a lot of places where it is kind of helpless. Mm-hmm. And then I think we have to organize bringing those women to healthcare out of state. And, you know, you talk a lot about, you've done such great work on abortion pills. And it really, you know, that's what happens in Poland and in other places where abortion is very, very, or Brazil. In fact, it was in Brazil that women discovered that misoprostol, which is an ulcer medication that is there over the counter, can be used to end a pregnancy. And they learned that. It's funny, said, don't take this while you're pregnant. I said, oh, hey. You know? Right,
they read the labels on the box.
They read the labels. Anyway, so there's a lot of possibilities there. But as long as the laws are what they are, and as long as people are enforcing those laws, all the good work of individuals or groups will not really be able to save everybody. It's terrible. It's terrible. So we have to get those laws overturned. It's just like in Ireland, you know, they had a total ban on abortion in the Constitution. And it was moving a mountain to get that out of the Constitution, but they did it. And one thing that helped was educating people. I mean, you don't have, you know, this is the thing I think you asked me before, you know, what do we do with what I call in pro the muddled middle? Yes. People that, you know, they're sort of, they don't want to see it banned, but they don't like it. And who are these anyway? And, you know, maybe she should have the baby and give it up for adoption, all that kind of thing. I think that some of those people can be moved as they face more real situations than the abstract situation in their head, which is the slut. or the very self-sacrificing woman who has a baby and gives it up for adoption. I mean, self-sacrificing in quotes. And I think that we have to engage in these conversations at a personal level, at a political level. It can't just be beating people over the head and saying, you know, you hate women. I don't think that persuades anybody, although it may be true.
And I mean, what are some ways of winning over that muddled middle, Katha? What's your elevator pitch?
I think my elevator pitch is that we should find people who don't agree with us and talk to them. And you probably already know people who don't agree with you. And I think, oh, I know. I think you can make a distinction, and I know not everybody would agree with me about this, between morality and legality. There are a lot of things that we don't like that are legal for a reason. It is legal to get a divorce, even if you're a man who wants to run off with, you know, a trophy wife. And gambling is legal. I happen to think that was a mistake, but nonetheless, there it is. I can still say I think gambling is wrong. I think it does immense social harm. Drinking alcohol is legal, and now in many places, other, you know, drugs are legal. So marijuana. So I think you can impress on people, yeah, okay, you think abortion is wrong, and I see that you really believe that, and you have some, you've thought it through, but it can still be legal because this is a divided country, and we can let when something is this divisive, when there's so many people who feel just as strongly as you do on the other side, maybe it's best to just have it be legal and let people make their own decision, because there is a real cost in public policy to making it, I wouldn't say in public policy, but because that sounds too formal, but there's a real cost to society when you make something illegal that is so important to so many people.
I want to read another question here related to that from Emma Jones. Is there a feasible legislative solution to the expected overturning of Roe? Can a Democratic majority protect reproductive rights even if the Supreme Court won't? And I think there might be a difference there between can and will. Katha, maybe you can address that. And I think I'd love to wrap another layer into that question, you know, coming off of your point about the muddled middle, which is, do we need the muddled middle? You know, do we, because the anti-abortion movement has so successfully built a grassroots movement, even though a majority of people are not on their side. But talk about that issue of Congress, and is there potential for movement at the federal level? We talked about state legislatures, but what about Democrats in Congress?
Well, this is where I think activism and grassroots organizing can really make a difference. I think first of all, we have to keep Congress, and we have to keep the Senate, and we have to get more people in the Senate, because right now Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are the most powerful people on the planet, and just because of our crazy system. So I think that we have to move Congress, and because they're not very brave, you know, they want to keep their jobs, and that often works against us, but it could also work for us if there were enough of us. But I want to address what you said about the muddled middle. Yes, we do need those people. We do, because those are the people who they might vote for an anti-choice person because they like him on some other issue. You know, there are a lot of people about that. I mean, a lot of people, all they care about is their taxes. It's shocking. That was a not enough discussed source of Trump's vote. You know, all those people who said, I don't like the tweets, I don't like what he says about women, but, you know, he's going to keep my taxes low and lower them further. They like that. So I think we need everybody. And, you know, I want to go back a little bit to what you said before about corporations, and is it bad to rely on corporations? Well, you know who relied on a corporation is the BDS movement, when they wanted to get SodaStream out of the West Bank. That involved affecting what a corporation did, and it was successful. So I think corporations are immensely powerful, and I think it would be way too purist to say, oh, keep your money, keep your power. I'm going to sit here with my picket sign, I mean, we live in this terrible fallen world, and we have to use every lever that we have.
Mm, mm. Wow. So 15 minutes left to submit your questions, so please drop them in the chat. I want to read another one from Chris Morata. What do you think will happen with women who have miscarriages in Texas? Do you think they might be vulnerable to accusations that they have aborted their pregnancy? I think that's a really important question, Katha, that speaks to that point we were talking about earlier about pregnancy criminalization and how that impacts especially people of color like Bebe Shui, Prabhi Patel, cases where we've already seen where people have been criminalized for their miscarriages even before Texas passed this law and in other states. What do you think we can expect to see in terms of criminalization?
That's definitely what's happened in El Salvador and other countries where abortion is completely illegal. That a woman will go to the emergency room with a miscarriage, and she will be accused of having had an abortion. And some of those women have been put in prison for a very, very long time. And I can definitely see that happening in Texas, especially, I want to say, if the using of abortion pills becomes very common. And I know that it mostly is great.
I think it is quite common, yeah, just under the radar.
Right. But they always say, well, if you go to, if you have a hemorrhage or whatever, you can go to the ER room. No one can tell that you've had an abortion. Well, just because no one can tell doesn't mean they can't make that claim. And there are a lot of anti-choice nurses and anti-choice people who work in hospitals. So I think it's a real danger. The National Advocates for Pregnant Women they're the people that are on top of the legal aspects of this, and they have long lists, like 1,300 people who have been arrested for, and in some cases imprisoned for their behavior during pregnancy, whether it's refusing a cesarean when your doctor thinks you should have one, or smoking marijuana. One woman told a nurse that she had fallen down the stairs. And then she also said, not in a causal way, that she wasn't sure she wanted this child. And she got in a lot of trouble. So there are people there that are just looking. They're looking for something that they can seize on to punish this woman.
Right. And of course, that's precisely what the Texas law empowers, any individual to, be on the lookout for any sign that of a transgression. And that's one of the things that's so terrifying about it, is this bounty hunter aspect, right? I want to read some good comments that are coming in the chat. We have a comment from the Center for Health, Ethics, and Social Policy saying, when you poll on abortion, you find those who are generally opposed to abortion and those in favor have a lot in common. They are agreed that some regulations, restrictions, especially in abortions in third trimester, should even second think these should be limited by law. So how do you think you can talk to the so-called mushy folks? And I think you were sort of addressing that, Katha, but that idea that, I guess the great risk there is that we end up marginalizing the people who are facing the most barriers to healthcare, which is folks who, because they can't raise enough money or because the nearest clinic is so far away, they get pushed into the second trimester with their pregnancies, and, teenagers, young people who have to go through judicial bypass processes. And especially now with the long wait, people are getting pushed further and further into pregnancy. But did you want to add anything else on that comment?
That's Frances Kisling. And we've been discussing this for years. Rose says that you can restrict abortion in the third trimester, which is already quite rare. You can restrict it to protect a woman's life and health. There are very, very few places where you can even have one of these abortions, these very late abortions. There's 4 or 5 known clinics that will do them. So I think that we talk a lot about those abortions because it works very well for the anti-choicers, because that's, aborting a viable fetus pre-baby, that's really kind of a very heavy thing. So I think it is important to remind people that there are very few, although not none, of these abortions. But also, I think that one way of talking about those abortions is to remind the world of what you said, which is the reason there are these late abortions is usually because the woman is chasing the money, or something really important in her life has changed. She's under tremendous stress and tension. It's very, the abortion gets pushed later and later. If, as Selena Meyer said in Veep, you could get an abortion at an ATM, then I think there would be, virtually none of these, because who wants to go through that? Of course, you would want to have an abortion earlier, as soon as you made the decision.
Although, of course, with fetal diagnostics and ultrasound,
yes.
often people might find out about a fetal abnormality,
Exactly.
later in pregnancy. Teenagers who are scared to tell their parents, or who are living in abusive homes. I mean, I think there are always going to be a certain number of
there's always
pregnancies.
Going to be, yes, there's always going to be a certain number, because life is so hard and it changes, and people are human beings. But I think we could if we set out, how are we going to reduce this? We would come up with, well, we're going to have abortion be, free and available. And rather than, okay, we're going to give you first trimester abortion, but you have to give us third trimester abortion.
I want to read another powerful comment in the chat from brilliant feminist Alex Ahmed, who writes, "For people who think and fear losing the word women, I beg you to imagine how it feels for trans and non-binary people who are under merciless attacks by the right, from bathroom bills, healthcare denials, forceful detransition of youth, and also from self-proclaimed liberal feminists that consider us not important enough to explicitly include in their movements." And this goes back to the point we were talking about earlier, Kath, on terminology. And I'll say, I think the movement is really shifting, and the consensus is really growing around using inclusive terminology, precisely for this reason, because I think it harms people who are already marginalized not to. And I hope you and I can keep talking about that, and I hope you'll be open to changing your position on that. Because, I was having a conversation about this yesterday with a close friend of mine who's non-binary, and they had a miscarriage. And so, do I then have to call them a woman because they've had a miscarriage? They felt very personally that pregnant person, well, it's maybe not a perfect term, it was the most accurate term for them. Do you want to address that piece at all?
Well, this is why I think that my solution of women, just including everybody, is the fairest. And I certainly understand that the movement is going this other way. But I just have to think what I think. And I definitely want to keep talking about it. I mean, if I could just say, nobody says, we can't talk about breast cancer and women because there are men who get breast cancer, and men are not calling to, let's say, cancer people, cancerous breast, what would the adjective be? Breast cancerous people with breast cancer. No, men aren't calling for that. And so I think that when there's the very large majority that is one way, then including the other people as not changing the original word, but including the other people is the fairest way.
That's interesting. I feel like I have seen some growing public awareness around the fact that men do have breast cancer, and that it's very dangerous to exclude them from the public messaging. But I like the solution of, women and men, and women and LGBTQ people who have abortions. And I don't think anyone's talking about erasing women, but I think, we're talking about being accurate about who's impacted, and not excluding folks who are already facing a lot of barriers. Rai Young wrote a really powerful piece from the New York Abortion Access Fund. Katha, I know you were very active with that group, that it has always been true that inclusion makes our movement stronger, not weaker. I like that line. Let's see, it is 54 4, so we just have a few minutes left for questions here. From Sandy Pelusic, what about the argument and fact that deaths are going to result from self-abortion and other botched attempts? What do you think of that, Katha?
Could you just repeat that? I was reading, Amy, you were ignoring the comments that agree with Katha.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
trying to read and talk here. Do you want to address that question, Katha? What about the fact that deaths are going to result from self-abortion and other botched attempts? We were talking about self-managed abortion and the increasing use of misoprostol and mifepristone.
Well, I don't know that the deaths will be from the pills, but, you know, just like within the last couple of years, there was a woman who, you know, aborted herself in the bath with a knitting needle, some old-fashioned method, and she almost died from blood loss. So, I mean, there are going to be cases where this happens. Fortunately, we have much better medicine than we had the last time abortion was illegal, and we have penicillin, et cetera. So it won't be, the death count will be lower, but there's bound to be people that are severely injured, if not killed, by this thing. And by this law. And I want to say another thing, which is there are people who need abortions for medical reasons. Jessica Valenti has written about having to have an abortion of a wanted child because she got this HELLP syndrome, which was potentially quite fatal. There are people like that. And I don't know that doctors in Texas are going to be able to deal with this in an efficient and proper way. I mean, the idea that this whole thing about, oh, well, no one will die because you can have an abortion if you're, to save your life, but they don't always know, as someone just recently wrote, they don't always know how close to death you are. What is it? We have to wait until you're at death's door and then we can give you an abortion.
Right.
It has to be a regular part of medical care so that it can be an option when it's necessary. There was a famous case in Louisiana a number of years ago where there was a woman in the hospital because she was had a terrible heart condition. She was pregnant and she had a major heart problem, and they refused to perform an abortion because the chances of her dying were only 50-50. I mean, what does that say?
Right.
What does that say about the disregard of women's life and safety? And what ended up happening was an abortion fund paid for her to go in an ambulance to a hospital that would perform the abortion.
And Dr. Ghazala Moayedi, who the op-ed that she wrote in the New York Times, she talks about a very similar, more recent situation like that, where patients come in with heart failure or very serious health complications from pregnancy. And, so the abortion law impacts pregnancy losses and this whole array of reproductive health care that we don't always think about. So I think we have time for one more quick question, and then it will be time to wrap up this very interesting conversation. And Katha, I did want to leave us on a note of talking about what people can do and where you find hope. So maybe we can wrap that in with a question I see here. In Pennsylvania, if a Republican governor is elected, there's a strong chance that we are the next state to pass a Texas-style law. Any proactive thoughts for us in Pennsylvania? And maybe we can use that, Katha, to say, what can people do in Pennsylvania and beyond? And how do we not, get very discouraged in this difficult moment for abortion access?
Well, I find just for myself, when I feel discouraged is when I'm not doing something. Once I start doing something, I cheer up a little bit. I cheer up a little bit. So in Pennsylvania, there's Turn Pennsylvania Blue, which I found on the internet, and now I hear from them every day. And people write postcards, they do phone banking, they go door to door. Because unfortunately, it is true that you can't just throw out electoral politics on this issue because this is about laws. And so I would say, you out there in Pennsylvania, find Turn Pennsylvania Blue online and get involved with them. And I think in every state, there's stuff that you can connect with.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think stay local, look at what your lawmakers are doing. And there's an encouraging story I like to tell about the activists in Texas who, you know, there's been about 30 ordinances to try to make sanctuary cities for the unborn. But in one of those cases, activists in Edinburgh, Texas, shut that hearing down and prevented the ordinance from passing. So there is vibrant local grassroots organizing going on that. And we are at time. So I want to thank everyone so much for joining us and encourage you to subscribe to The Nation, join us in conversation on social media, and it was such an honor, Katha, to talk with you and be in conversation at this critical moment. Thanks so much again to The Nation and everyone else.
Well, thank you, Amy. You did a fantastic job, and it was really wonderful to be in conversation with you. And I know we'll continue after this.
I certainly hope so.